Marcus Thompson adjusted the ivory tablecloth with practiced precision, his weathered hands smoothing each wrinkle until the surface gleamed under the crystal chandeliers. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel buzzed with preparation as servers in crisp uniforms hurried past, carrying silver trays and arranging centerpieces worth more than most people's monthly rent. In the corner, 80-year-old Emma sat cross-legged on a velvet chair, her math homework spread across a small side table. Her dark curls fell across her face as she worked, occasionally glancing up to watch her father orchestrate the evening's preparations with quiet authority. Marcus paused beside the main stage, studying the speaker's podium with an expression that seemed oddly familiar with such settings. His fingers traced the microphone stand briefly before he turned away, checking his watch. The guests would arrive within the hour, and everything had to be perfect for Helena Cross's annual charity gala. The ballroom doors swept open as the first wave of elegantly dressed attendees began to filter in, their laughter and conversations filling the space with an energy that made Emma look up from her homework with curious eyes. The Whitmore family swept through the entrance like royalty expecting fanfare. Richard Whitmore, his silver hair perfectly styled and his tuxedo tailored to perfection, surveyed the room with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to owning everything he saw. His wife Victoria glided beside him, her diamond necklace catching the light as she whispered critiques about the decorations. Marcus approached their designated table, carrying a bottle of champagne with the same careful attention he gave everything else. As he began to pour, Richard barely glanced in his direction. "The help seems competent enough," Richard murmured to Victoria, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Though I do hope they've been properly trained for an event of this caliber." Victoria tittered behind her jeweled fingers. "One can never be too careful with these people, darling. They simply don't understand the standards we're accustomed to." Marcus continued pouring without reaction, though his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Across the room, Emma had looked up from her homework, her young face troubled by the tone she couldn't quite understand but instinctively disliked. Helena Cross entered the ballroom at that moment, her presence commanding immediate attention from everyone except the oblivious Whitmores, who remained focused on their casual cruelty. Helena Cross moved through the crowd with grace, her keen eyes taking in every detail of the evening she had spent months planning. At 62, she had built her fortune through careful observation and decisive action, qualities that served her well in both business and philanthropy. She paused near the Whitmore table, ostensibly to greet other guests, but her attention was drawn to the exchange unfolding before her. Marcus had returned with their appetizer course, arranging the delicate plates with an artistry that spoke of deeper understanding than mere service training. "I suppose this will have to do," Richard declared, barely glancing at the exquisite presentation. "Though I must say, the staff at the Metropolitan Club would never allow such pedestrian plating." Marcus straightened slowly, his composure unwavering despite the unnecessary insult. Helena noticed the slight tremor in his hands, not from nervousness but from restrained emotion. Victoria leaned forward conspiratorially. "Richard, dear, perhaps we should request someone more experienced. This gentleman seems rather out of his depth for such an important evening." From her corner, Emma had abandoned all pretense of homework, her wide eyes fixed on the adults whose words carried a weight she was beginning to understand. Helena watched the child's face cloud with confusion and hurt. The evening progressed with clockwork precision, though the Whitmores seemed determined to find fault with every interaction. Marcus moved between tables with quiet efficiency, his responses to their increasingly pointed comments remaining courteous and professional. Helena observed from across the room as Marcus paused beside Emma's makeshift study corner. The transformation in his demeanor was immediate and telling. His shoulders relaxed, his smile became genuine, and when he spoke to his daughter, his voice carried an educated cadence that seemed at odds with his current circumstances. "How's the math homework coming along, sweetheart?" he asked, his hand resting gently on Emma's shoulder. Emma looked up with troubled eyes. "Daddy, why are those people being mean to you?" Marcus knelt beside her chair, his voice dropping to a protective whisper. "Sometimes grown-ups forget their manners when they think nobody important is watching. But you and I know better, don't we?" Helena moved closer, intrigued by the exchange. She had spent decades reading people, and everything about Marcus suggested depths that his current position didn't reveal. The way he carried himself, his careful diction, even his posture spoke of someone accustomed to respect and authority. The evening's first crisis arrived precisely then, as Helena's assistant rushed toward her with obvious distress. "Mrs. Cross, I'm so sorry to interrupt," Helena's assistant breathed, her face flushed with panic. "Dr. Harrison just called from the airport. His flight was cancelled due to the storm, and he won't make it for the keynote address." Helena felt her stomach drop. The evening's success hinged on the keynote speech about education funding, and 300 of the city's most influential donors were expecting to hear from the renowned education reformer. Richard Whitmore, overhearing the commotion, rose from his table with theatrical concern. "What a terrible shame," he announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Though I'm sure we could find someone to fill the time. Perhaps one of the waitstaff could entertain us with their insights on philanthropy." His laughter was cruel and deliberate, designed to humiliate rather than lighten the mood. Victoria joined in with her tinkling giggle, while other guests shifted uncomfortably. "Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Have you ever witnessed someone being unfairly judged based on their appearance or job?" Marcus stood perfectly still, absorbing the mockery with quiet dignity, though his hands clenched slightly at his sides. Helena watched the scene unfold with growing disgust, her mind racing for solutions while her heart burned with anger at the Whitmores' casual cruelty toward a man who had done nothing but serve them with grace. Helena Cross had built her empire by recognizing potential where others saw nothing, and every instinct told her that Marcus Thompson was far more than he appeared. She watched him continue his duties with unshakable composure despite the Whitmores' escalating taunts, and something in his bearing reminded her of the boardroom leaders she respected most. Richard's voice carried across the ballroom as he continued his performance. "Really, Helena, I think our friend here could give us all a lesson in proper service. Though I doubt he has much experience with public speaking." The surrounding tables fell silent, guests uncertain whether to laugh or cringe at the obvious cruelty. Marcus stood motionless, his face a mask of professional calm, but Helena caught the slight tightening around his eyes that spoke of deep, controlled pain. Emma had abandoned her homework entirely, tears threatening as she watched her father endure the humiliation. Her small hands gripped the edge of her chair, and Helena could see the child struggling between wanting to defend her father and not wanting to make things worse. Helena made her decision with the same swift certainty that had made her billions. She strode toward the podium with purposeful steps, her mind already forming a plan that would either vindicate her instincts or create the evening's greatest disaster. Helena reached the podium and turned to face the crowd, her presence commanding immediate attention. The conversations died away as 300 pairs of eyes focused on their host, wondering how she would handle the evening's unexpected crisis. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "We face an unfortunate situation this evening, but sometimes the universe provides us with unexpected opportunities." Richard Whitmore leaned back in his chair with smug satisfaction, certain that Helena would simply cancel the keynote and move to the auction. His expression shifted to confusion as Helena's gaze found Marcus across the room. "What part of this story resonates most with you? Share your thoughts. Tonight, instead of our scheduled speaker, I'd like to invite someone who embodies the very spirit of service and dedication that our cause represents. Marcus Thompson, would you please join me at the podium?" The ballroom fell into stunned silence. Marcus stood frozen, his face pale with shock. Emma's eyes widened with a mixture of pride and terror for her father. The Whitmores looked as though they had been slapped, Richard's mouth hanging open in disbelief. Helena extended her hand toward Marcus with unwavering confidence, though she herself was taking the biggest gamble of her philanthropic career. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Marcus remained motionless. 300 of the city's most powerful people waited in absolute silence, some leaning forward with curiosity, others cringing in anticipation of disaster. The Whitmores sat frozen in horrified fascination, certain they were about to witness the evening's ultimate humiliation. Then something shifted in Marcus's posture. His shoulders straightened, his chin lifted slightly, and when he began walking toward the podium, his stride carried a confidence that seemed to emerge from somewhere deep within. Each step revealed layers of presence that his humble uniform had concealed. Emma watched with wide eyes as her father transformed before the entire room. This was the daddy she knew from their quiet moments at home, the one who helped with homework using words that seemed too big and ideas that sparkled with wisdom. Helena felt her heartbeat quicken as Marcus approached. Up close, she could see the intelligence burning in his dark eyes, the careful control of someone who had once commanded attention as naturally as breathing. When he reached the podium, he paused for just a moment, his hands resting on the wooden surface with familiar ease. Marcus looked out over the sea of expectant faces, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the ballroom with unexpected resonance and authority. "Good evening," Marcus began, his voice carrying the warm authority of someone born to speak to crowds. "Tonight, we gather not as strangers divided by circumstance, but as partners united by possibility." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. This was not the stammering embarrassment they had expected. Richard Whitmore's smug expression began to falter as Marcus continued with growing confidence. 3 years ago, I stood before audiences much like this one, speaking about the transformative power of education and second chances. I believed then, as I believe now, that every person possesses untapped potential waiting for the right moment to emerge. Helena felt goosebumps rise on her arms. The man before them was clearly a seasoned public speaker, his timing perfect, his presence magnetic. Around the ballroom, guests who had been preparing to endure an awkward few minutes now leaned forward with genuine interest. "But life has a way of teaching us humility," Marcus continued, his gaze sweeping across the room with practiced ease. "Sometimes we find ourselves in circumstances we never imagined, serving in ways we never planned. Yet it is often in these moments of unexpected service that we discover who we truly are." Victoria Whitmore gripped her husband's arm, her face pale with dawning realization. Marcus stepped closer to the microphone, his voice gaining strength with each word. "I have served you tonight not because I lack ability or ambition, but because love sometimes requires us to set aside our former selves. 3 years ago, I was Dr. Marcus Thompson, director of the International Education Initiative, speaking at conferences in Geneva and Singapore." Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Several guests recognized the name, their faces showing shock and growing understanding. Richard Whitmore looked as though he might be sick. "When my wife Sarah passed away, I made a choice to prioritize presence over prestige, to choose stability over status for my daughter. Tonight, serving each of you, has reminded me that dignity is not defined by title or salary, but by how we treat one another when we believe no one important is watching." If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're listening from around the world. What's your time zone right now? The audience sat in rapt attention, many wiping away tears as Marcus continued with passionate eloquence about education funding, citing statistics with the ease of someone who had dedicated his career to the cause. Emma beamed with pride from her corner, finally seeing her father as the room now saw him. Helena smiled with deep satisfaction, her gamble vindicated beyond her wildest hopes. Marcus's voice reached its crescendo as he shared the evening's final, most powerful message. "True philanthropy is not about the size of our donations, but about the size of our hearts. It is not about how much we give, but about how we see those around us. Every person in this room tonight has been served by individuals whose stories we never bothered to learn, whose dreams we never thought to ask about." The silence in the ballroom was absolute, broken only by the sound of quiet weeping from several moved listeners. Marcus's words hung in the air like a benediction, transforming not just the evening but the very souls of those who heard them. Richard Whitmore sat slumped in his chair, his face ashen with shame. The man he had mocked and belittled was not only his intellectual superior but had demonstrated a grace and dignity that exposed Richard's own moral poverty. Victoria pressed her napkin to her eyes, finally understanding the magnitude of their cruelty. When Marcus concluded his speech, the applause began slowly, then built to a thunderous ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ballroom. People rose to their feet as one, many openly weeping, all recognizing they had witnessed something extraordinary. As the applause finally subsided, Helena joined Marcus at the podium, her eyes bright with tears and determination. "Dr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone, "I have a proposition for you. Would you consider heading our foundation's new Speakers Bureau? Your daughter would have the finest education we can provide, and you would return to the work you were born to do." Marcus looked across the room to where Emma sat beaming with pride, her homework forgotten in the magnitude of the moment. The little girl who had watched her father endure humiliation now saw him offered the recognition he deserved. The Whitmore family slipped quietly from their table, unable to face the man they had so grievously wronged. Their departure went largely unnoticed as the crowd surged forward to congratulate Marcus and shake his hand. 6 months later, Dr. Marcus Thompson stood before audiences around the world once again, but this time Emma traveled with him during school breaks, proud to introduce herself as the daughter of the man who taught people about second chances. Helena Cross had not only found her foundation's most compelling voice, but had witnessed firsthand the truth Marcus preached that transformative evening, that every person carries hidden depths of worth, waiting only for someone to believe in their potential.